think this is, well, let me check it since I'm not.
Well, you don't need to be on the Zoom if you're in person.
It's not here.
Okay.
Since people are behind me, you know.
We can after summer call it work. Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to January 28th special work session. This is our first time trying this particular method, which is that we're doing a lot of us are here in person at North Gresham Elementary School in the library, and obviously others are going to participate online. We do have one director who's intending to join us virtually, and that is Director Stowers. All the rest of the board members are in attendance here in person, so I'm call this to order. So we'll go ahead and move forward. So we have a meeting agenda board. There an action.
I would move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second. Okay, it's been moved by Chris, seconded by Matt to approve the meeting agenda. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, any opposed? Okay, so we're 6 at this point. Okay. Okay, we're going to move into information items, and first is really the focus of this meeting is a return to learn update. On Wednesday, December 23rd, 2020, Governor Brown announced that beginning January 1st, 2021, school health safety metrics for returning to in-person instruction will become advisory rather than mandatory. The governor stated that moving forward, the decision to resume in-person instruction must be made locally at the district level. On January 19th, 2021, the Oregon Department of Education released guidelines on schools.
And the administration reviewed these update metrics and reported their January 1st, 2021 work session.
That's me.
The meeting attendance is maxed out at 100 people right now. So there are people who can't get in.
It should be fine for them. Tech issue with.
There's 114 participants, so it's exceeding 100.
To continue this action or this information item, last week the board received a preliminary return to learn presentation. Board, that presentation has been updated based on last week's various interpretations, and we're going to receive that from Mr. Cook. At the conclusion of our last meeting, January 21st, of this particular item, the administration posed the following questions to the board for consideration. Notably, should the district continue with mandatory metrics? Should the district begin the phasing of limited in-person instruction as proposed? Should the district allow outside entities to use district facilities? Those were the three questions that administration identified as something for the board to consider. That's why we called this special work session. So as Mr. Cook is working through this presentation, please try to keep those in mind. The actions available to the board are more numerous than what those questions would answer. But I think we owe it to the administration to at least be able to competently discuss that. So, with that, Mr. Cook.
Kara, we tag team this presentation, so I'm going to turn it back over to Superintendent Ferrer to start us off.
Yes. Thank you, John, and thanks, board, and those of you who are tuning in tonight. I want to begin tonight actually with a quote from our newest poet laureate, Amanda Gorman, and it reads, "While we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us." There's no achievement gap, growth, and disparities without knowing that there are opportunities to improve. Nearly a year ago, into this pandemic, and our schools are still closed. Like so many educators across the country, as well as families and parents, each of us has grown weary with the overwhelming number of challenges that we face. But like many, we remain committed. We remain committed to our mission, vision, and goals. We remain committed to our portrait of a graduate. And though there is no pandemic playbook, we attempt to build our blueprint and plan to allow and remain committed to achieving access and opportunities for each and every student. We continue to refine and to redevelop changes as they are extended. We are still working through changes from the 19th from Governor Brown. And with the vaccine as a new reality, we hope to have our staff vaccinated within the next 2 to 3 weeks. Granted, the vaccine inventory is stable. We're hopeful to have our students back in our schools where they belong. And tonight, as Chair Peterson acknowledged, we're asking for a review of this information and for the board to answer 3 questions about safety metrics, whether or not we begin Lippy, as well as offer our facilities for public use. And with that, I will turn it over to James and Jordan for an update on vaccine.
Thank you, Dr. Ferrer. So, as we've been monitoring, vaccine distribution in an effort to Multnomah County.
I am on this. Huh?
Document ESD, we have been forwarding names to our wave 1 staff, limited in-person instruction staff, along with our operational staff. And on Tuesday and Thursday, all of our wave 1 staff have been able to schedule appointments to get the vaccine in the next 2 weeks. Our goal is early next week to be able to provide names to our wave 2 staff members that are our 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade staff, as well as elementary PE, music, and art, and additional staff for first vaccination shots the week of February 12th, and so forth and so on. So we are looking at getting the first round of vaccines into our staff's arms within the next 3 weeks. The vaccine is being sequenced by the Oregon Health Authority, so we are in cooperation with our ESD and with the Oregon Health Authority, and we are supporting our staff through the distribution of emails and helping them to sign up for those that want to get the vaccine. Thank you.
Chair, the advisory metrics and required protocols that come next. When students and staff return to on-site instruction, I'm going to review for you the amount of changes that we need to make to do it safely. As you see in the first line of the presentation, there are 160 plus different protocols we have to put in place to be able to have people return safely. We have designated, you have given us 5 days to designate to be able to train staff when students return. We anticipate we'll need at least 1 or 2 days to be able to do that thoroughly. There is a designated school leader to implement, support, and enforce the health and safety protocols. That's the principal. If the principal's not there, the principal will designate other people to do that work. We are prepared to provide a comprehensive distance learning instruction model and option for students and families that choose to remain off-site as well. We're ready to work with families to serve students, especially high-risk populations, whether learning is happening through on-site, hybrid, or comprehensive distance learning. These are the new advisory metrics. These come out with, come on.
This is the presentation.
Yeah.
I tried to, doesn't leave it, I was looking sure.
I can just share. You want to? Chair, would you like me to review that slide one more time?
No, to be honest, no, we'll just keep on progressing and
Okay.
we can bring questions back to it.
Okay. Go for it. This slide, what you're seeing are the new overall metrics, that ODE has handed down as of January 19th. Currently, if you're looking in the column second from the right, the orange column, GBSD falls into those broad metrics. What that means is we are between 200 and 350 cases per 100,000, and we have a positivity rate of less than 10%. Both of those are accurate, which means we should be actively planning and are actively planning for a return in either limited in-person or hybrid. These are the specific numbers as of Tuesday, because OHA publishes these numbers once a week, so we update it once a week. You can see it in Clackamas County, we're at 226, and Multnomah County at 243. And the positivity rate is 5.2 and 4.4 respectively. Prior to this week, you could see a really steep drop in the number of cases statewide, particularly in Clackamas County and Multnomah County. That has plateaued over the past couple of days. Don't know what that means, whether we go back up or not, but it's remaining rather steady so that we're in the orange column.
So there's three metrics, but you only have listed two that's current. So the middle metric, the 60 to 90, which is the individual cases per county, where are we at?
The 60 to 90 is for small counties, small populations, so that doesn't, thank you for catching that, Matt.
Okay,
That doesn't apply to us.
Just the print is so small, I can't see it.
I'm sorry, Matt. Doesn't it? Okay. I can't, because of the presentation, guys, I'm sorry, I couldn't see the bottom of the slide. This is our proposed, what we gave to you guys last week was a limited in-person instruction phases. So right now, we're in the first part of the phase, and that's the vaccine phase. James and HR and others worked really well this week with OHA to start that process. OHA has allocated 2,000 vaccines a day for educators in the region, and our first invitations were sent out yesterday to staff, and staff have been actively going downtown to receive those vaccinations. Once we get to a certain level, we get to a point of we're going to be preparing actively for LIPI, which is limited in-person instruction, pardon me. That'll be the training, the setup, and other things needed to make sure kids can come in safely. And you guys, and I'll speak to this a little bit more later, you all saw what most of the buildings are. They are ready to do this. We've been actively preparing for weeks, or actively planning for weeks. Phase one of LIPI would be when those students first come back. Once we get that in place, and that would be most likely our students, or that will be our students with higher needs, disabilities, and others at risk. And then when we get that up and running, depending on how that goes, we'll get into phase two of LIPI, which will be another level of students coming in. We spoke to principals about that today and gave them what the leveling would be. And as you can see, we're going to progress forward phases as we implement the other phases and as metrics dictate. Questions?
To go into a little bit more about the limited in-person instruction is that, and just a reminder of people that are following along in this presentation, any of the purpley colors are sort of new things that we haven't specifically called out until tonight. The LIPI, as others have said, is aimed to meet the needs of specific groups based on educational, relational, social, emotional, curricular, instructional, and or assessment. And that's important because it's not just a special ed population, it's not just specialized programs, it can be those that are in risk of failing or things that we really want to just be able to support. Because LIPI is increased on top of comprehensive learning. But things remain the same, cohorts and the number of people that you can mix with, and cohorts of 20 students, no more than 2 cohorts in any given week. That's something that causes us to make sure that we are in compliance. time on campus is also important. It cannot be, intermittent, and it needs to be 2 hours. And so it doesn't replace comprehensive distance learning, it's in addition. Other things that we have covered in the past is that we want to make sure that people realize that this cannot be required. It's a suggestion and a support for those that need it most. And that you want to consider the other students that, could be, asked to join, these special instruction groups.
Could you explain the cohorts to me, like, in this building, what would, we have 20, and this is phase one, with 20 students in a cohort, and no more than 2 cohorts. So could you explain that in this setting?
Sure. Well, we would specifically, well, in fact, some of our classrooms are not even going to be able to manage the 20, but we would definitely bring in a cohort of 20, in the school, probably, maybe 1 or more rooms. And, it would be, for an addition, maybe after school, maybe it would be, a change to their, instead of their, direct instruction with their teacher, it may be, where that, a teacher's working with them, and then the other group that is, hybrid is being supported by a support staff, something like that. But are you just saying how many rooms would we use?
Is it 20 per building, or 20 per room? So that's what I'm trying to figure out what a cohort is.
Per room, yeah.
Okay,
per room,
so
but we
you
don't
could
even have, yeah, so go ahead with that.
Another example might be, if students that say are on the same bus, that's, one group of students, and so let's say there's 5 kids on a bus, there's 5, and then if they are in a classroom with, say, a different group of students, that there's maybe 10, that's 15 students, so they've got 15 so far, so, but that's 2 cohorts. If there were, say, 10 kids on the bus and 10 different kids in the classroom, that's 20, that would be the max. So it's how many, it's about, different kids, and keeping that number low to minimize the spread.
So you can have more than 20 kids in a
Yeah,
building.
Correct.
It's just those kids can't,
Right.
you're gonna have they're gonna have common contacts somewhere along the line. So
Right.
there's a lot of math and a lot of scheduling.
It is. Yeah, and so like one student wouldn't come into contact with more than 19 other kids, during a LIPI model.
Wow, that's some scheduling.
Yeah, it's gonna be all kinds of fun.
So Lisa, kind of or Michelle, on the cohort thing, if a teacher A has 4 of her students that want to do the LIPI, and teacher B has 4 of their students, would those 8 students go potentially to one teacher, and they would do something else? Is that kind of where some kids wouldn't get their regular teacher that they've had?
I think, if we're talking about a limited in-person model,
Uh-huh.
because it's easy to muck the two because they work differently.
Okay.
In a limited in-person, it's 2 hours on campus.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if it were, say, a specialized program, like an LE program, and 4 students came in another school, because there's only one LE in each school, LE program, like an LE1 in each school, and then there was another one in another school, we wouldn't combine those 2 different schools. They would run, and the team of staff that supports that program would support students online and students that come in for the limited in-person portion of the time, to kind of keep that consistency for the children.
So back to that scheduling.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I should interject for those who don't know, because we continue to use acronyms. LE is Learning Essentials. We have a Learning Essentials 1 and a Learning Essentials 2, and it's for students with disabilities, higher impact disabilities that we serve more intensely.
Yeah.
So that was sort of the cohorting and the number of students and some of the students that we would be serving and rolling that and phasing into more students implemented in person. But we also wanted to cover the hybrid model, required health and safety rules. The cohorting for hybrid, specifically, for hybrid in elementary is slightly easier when you've got one teacher, for the most part, for our elementary students. Granted, we have specialists as well, but that's why it's a little different for secondary. But what's required is that students have to be in a single cohort, not in a single cohort or multiple cohorts that exceed 100 people within the educational week. So that is what, like Michelle said, how are you being bused? What class are you going to be in? Where is your playground? And that's gonna be the same class that you were with. And if you have any other interaction with any other, classes or classrooms. So we wanna make sure that you realize that there is specific numbers that we would stay within the required health and safety rules of the return to learn. We have to have a system for daily logs of that contact, for contact tracing, and to make sure that we're, able to contact those that, may have been impacted. That doesn't mean everyone in the entire school is going to be contacted, because it would be within that cohort. And, that's important to know. And also, we want to minimize the number of staff that interact with each cohort. And so, as we were saying, there's a classroom, there's a bus driver and buses, but there's also multiple cohorts when we're talking about music, PE, or any of the other, the library and paraprofessionals that may be serving and supporting more than one classroom. Those, things are slightly easier in elementary, but keep in mind, a hybrid will change the cohorts of students and the cohorts, and which students may end up with what teacher, because we have a variety of things that James will probably want to speak about when it comes to, we're counting children and students of what they want, and then we also have our requirements of making sure that our staff is at hand and who can be there with it. So I know that it's for both, but want to add about staffing?
Well, this is a good time for me to interject, which you asked before about the day in the life of a student. So if we're imagining at the elementary level, the bus arrives at the bus stop. Students are hopefully socially distancing, and parents are supporting that. We're not going to be able to supervise that piece. Kids will have masks, they'll have the stuff that they need to bring to school. The bus driver will stop the bus, open the door, and visually screen students as they get on one at a time. They won't let them get on like they used to in the past, there's a line of kids getting on. Students will be screened by the bus driver. And then if a student is exhibiting symptoms, they will be secluded on the bus. They'll be asked to sit in the front or somewhere. I know they have a protocol for that. And students will load in the morning back to front. One student to a seat, staggered, moving forward. They will offload the bus when they get to school similarly, but front to back, so they don't have to cross with each other. Kids will be trained, and we're going to send a video to the community when the time comes so that they can see how this looks. And then kids will be trained by school staff as well about how to do that. They'll exit the bus, and each student has been issued an ID card because contact tracing is critical. And I should step back a little bit. I forgot about the beginning of the day. Each day, parents, regardless of cohort their student is in, will get a screening email. We're asking them to fill that out, that if their student is exhibiting symptoms, it's a self-screen, then that prompts parents to keep the student home. And that helps us, and then we're gonna ask parents that even if they keep them home, to call us and tell us they're keeping them home so that we can track those symptoms. So then you get to the bus, you have the screening, you have the loading, you have the offloading. They come to school, they each have an ID tag. Those are already printed and ready to be distributed when it's time. Kids will, similar to staff, they will just put their ID card above on the badge reader. It'll clock when they come in and who they came in with, because they'll have a before and after student. Do we need to know that as well? And it makes it more efficient rather than having to write down student names, and it prevents that buildup at the door as well. When they come in the door, they'll be expected to, they'll get another screen from a staff member, a visual screen, and they will get a hand sanitizer that's at the doors of every building, and then they'll be expected to go straight to class. When they get to class, if they eat breakfast at school, breakfast will be waiting for them because they will have ordered it the day before. They'll get it out, they'll sanitize their desks, and they'll be taught how to do that as well. The teacher will spray, the kids will wipe it down. They'll eat their meal, clean up, and school will get ready to start. We'll teach. We've set up each classroom, and because each student needs to have 35 square feet of space to themselves, and the teacher needs a significant amount of space to be able to teach, our rooms are running at about a capacity of 14 to 17, depending on the size of the classroom in that building. All of the rooms across the district have been arranged in this way so that we can meet that standard. What you also saw tonight where you had your meal was we put all of our surplus furniture at this point in the cafeterias which limits the use of those spaces, but that's how we were able to accommodate and keep the furniture in the building. It has been a significant lift to do all of this, because there are 840 classrooms across the district. In the classroom, students will be expected to stay in those desks the entire time that they're here. There will be times to go out to recess, and recess has also been, the sections have been segregated. So a cohort will go to a specific area, and it'll be a different area each day, but the cohort will have to stay in the same area, which limits the equipment use for kids on a given day, but they'll be in a rotation where they'll eventually get to all the equipment throughout the week. It's the only way to do it. It's the only way to do that and meet ODE's guidelines for cohorting. At lunch, it'll be similar. The lunches are brought to the room. The teacher will help them sanitize the desk by swerving. Kids will wipe it down. If you're given a paper towel, they'll throw that paper towel away and they will eat in their desks with each other. They'll clean up, and then instruction will happen again after lunch is over, unless there's a recess piece to that too, and then there's a recess protocol. You also saw in the halls tonight how we have put signage up throughout the building, all over campus of, this is how you walk down the hall, right side, left side, signs for social distancing, and what you didn't get an opportunity to see, I don't think, is the signage in the bathrooms about washing your hands and how you act with others and other things that are there too. So those protocols will have to be taught to students, and I will go back to what I said in an earlier slide. There are over 160 different protocols that we have to train staff and students on to make sure that we're maintaining a safe environment. And for lack of a better word, it's inundating for staff to know and for students to follow. Any questions for me on the day in the life?
I do have a question on the hybrid model. So in the Liffey model, it's 2 hours of instruction. So is it a full day then in the hybrid model?
Not quite. To get them in and out and back and forth to school, it's gonna be a little less than a full day.
Less than, like, it's 75% of a full day, 50% of a full day?
75 to 85%. I have to go back and look at the schedule.
Okay.
Okay, so earlier you said something about, students that show symptoms that have to sit on the front or the back of the bus.
Mhm.
So we're letting students with symptoms come to school.
It is much safer than leaving a little one on the sidewalk where a parent might not be.
Is someone gonna pick them up afterwards?
We will have to, we will
Okay,
call,
I didn't catch that part.
yeah, we will have to call parents if they come. There'll be another screening at school. So I
Okay,
probably shouldn't have asked for questions, but I'll answer this, and that way we can answer them in the end, because it gets detailed.
okay,
If a student is secluded, we will ask that student to go to what we call a care room, and there'll be a more intense scrutiny, including a temperature check, to see if they really do have the symptoms, and then that staff will be trained for what to do next.
okay.
Okay.
Well, I'm thinking now, like, are we?
Let me share a little bit about some of the staffing, that Mr. Cook had mentioned and Lisa had talked about. So thus far, Human Resources have met with about 195 of our staff members around, questions about returning to learn, and returning to learn under a Liffey or hybrid. Some of the data we have pulled thus far is we have about 20 staff members who have doctor's notes that say that they can return once they have the vaccine, the first and the second vaccine. But we also have about 60 staff members, and this is licensed and classified staff members, that they have a doctor's note that states that they will not be able to return even after getting a vaccine because of pre-existing medical conditions. So, you know, we are working with staff members around the EGBSD model, online programming. We're working with principals, and as we pivot into limited in person, we're going to have to look at staffing at all levels, particularly at the elementary first, to make sure we have enough staff on the ground to be able to work with kids that are coming in the building. So there could be some transferring of staff from building to building, from level to level, to make sure that we have the amount of staff we need to be able to supervise and care for the kids that come to the school. So it is going to be a bit challenging, but we're ready to move in that direction once we meet the metrics and be able to move in that direction.
So if you can explain to me how somebody who's had the vaccine and can't come to work, that doesn't make any sense.
Well, we have doctor's notes that speak directly to medical situations where, whether they have the vaccine or not, they doctors have stated that they are not able to return.
So then next year, if we're full staffed and everything's hunky-dory, they can't come back at that point either?
You know, again, the doctor's notes are somewhat detailed, and some of them will have to reevaluate after.
There's long-term disability for that, isn't there? Wouldn't that be a long-term disability issue at that point? Those can't function at their job. Well, it makes sense.
We do have a model where we're going to allow some of our licensed staff to work in the EGBSD model, which would be online, so they could do that without being in the building, and so could.
Well, no, that's great, but, I mean, that doesn't make any sense. It's not logical.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's until there's some level of community herd immunity reached. Is that?
The doctor's note does not specify that, so
Okay.
of course, we would be asking for updated information, when the time is appropriate. But right now, we're looking to make sure we have staff in the buildings from when we pivot into limited in-person, and then beyond that. So there are gonna be times where we're gonna have to work with the employees and their medical provider to get updated doctor's notes around, their ability to return as far as fitness for duty. And again, all of that is HIPAA protected, and we work closely with the doctors and the employees on that.
That's just a head scratcher.
There are some
Sorry.
medical conditions where you can't get the vaccine, whether
Well,
it's flu or
if you
anything
can't get
else.
the vaccine, I understand that.
Yeah,
I
Yeah.
get that, but that's not what I'm hearing. I'm hearing that if they've had the vaccine, they will still can't come back.
but they can't get the vaccine.
Question mark.
That is a
Mhm.
reasonable question. I'm sorry to hijack this portion, Mr. Cook. Is there any specificity as to this is employees who receive 2 doses of the vaccine and still cannot return to work? Are we understanding that? correctly?
I will have to do a little bit more
Okay.
specific research. I'm giving you general numbers of what the number, 190 plus people that we've talked to, and what the doctors know.
Do we have an indication what percentage of the staff are actually, indicating that they will get the vaccine? Because I know in the medical field, that number is actually alarmingly, high.
We do not have the ability to ask staff if they are going to be able to get the vaccine or not. So, with the different ways we've given employees the opportunity to get the vaccine, and it's depending on the industry. You know, I've heard as low as 67% and as high as, 80%. So, I do know that all the employees in wave 1 were given the opportunity and have signed up. So, unless they've called me and given me feedback about their experience, which many have.
I wasn't asking for specifics, just like a general poll, if you even can do that, but that's.
I wouldn't have that information.
I suppose if they've been given the opportunity to get the vaccine in phase 1, then we're going to assume if they're coming back, they've had it, and then it's not incumbent upon them, to make that decision.
Yeah, Matt, I think we would be, up against the HIPAA violations of asking, so I think James is
Yeah,
trying
I
to
get
dance
that
around
part.
it, I'm just gonna say it's a HIPAA issue.
I just want to clarify something. So this is all happening after they've had both vaccines, right? All the,
Because that was gonna be my question too.
We are prepared to start with the LE1s, LE2s, probably about the end of, next month or the beginning of March. I hesitate to give a date because I wanna make sure at least the first round is out, right? So we can start after the first round.
So we don't have to wait for the second dose of the vaccine to do it, they can start it with.
Not begin Libby.
Okay.
I just have a question about that. I don't know if you can hear me, but why would we start before full vaccination? If we are going to dramatically reduce our risk from 1 month to another, from March to April, why wouldn't we start in April after the 2 rounds of the vaccinations, and then there's been, the waiting period? Why would we want to risk our staff?
Director Stowers, a very good question. Staff are asking as well, and we have the same concern. If you look at the redundancy, if you take the vaccine first, let's pretend that doesn't exist yet, they're still developing it. we would still be, according to the state, in a position to start considering how to come back at this point because the metrics are saying that. Now, let's put the vaccine in place, because that's a legitimate question. When you put in all of the safety measures that we have, you start with social distancing, go to washing hands, go to wearing masks, all the things that we're required to do, and we will do those, and we will enforce those. And then you add in the first dose gives you about 75% vaccination, or 75% immunity. You get to a point where the potential for transferring the virus is minimal, but your concern is valid. It is still a possibility. But we are doing everything we can within that guidance from ODE and OHA, and those are the experts in this, to make sure that staff are safe.
Go ahead and continue.
As I just touched on, physical distancing is the next slide to go over. The thing that has changed out of this guidance, the updated guidance on January 19th, is that the distance for teachers needed to be adjusted. So right now, teachers have to have a 3-foot corridor to get back and forth with their learning devices in the front of the classroom. So we accommodated that. They also need 6 more feet between them and students, which equals 9 feet. So we have rearranged classrooms to meet that. What it did essentially was take the amount of students we could put into a classroom down to 13 or 14 from 18 to 19. We still have that 35 square foot social distancing piece, and we are working toward minimizing, that's why the students have the cards, et cetera, to get into the building quickly. We're minimizing that having to stand in line, because we know how well the kindergartners and first graders stand in line. I'm on this one too, pardon me. I'm going back and forth between reading glasses and this. I'm struggling just a little bit. Matt, I'm sure you understand. Okay, yeah. Face coverings are not a choice for staff or for students, and we will continue to enforce that. As I said in last week's meeting, we will teach kids. It's from a positive end of it. What I see in the community is kids wearing masks, so we're not as concerned about this, but there may be the occasion where a kid refuses, doesn't want to, gets oppositional. So we will continue to teach. But if it's persistent, and we are getting to an issue of it's unsafe, the student will likely be moved to comprehensive distance learning from the classroom. Why is it okay to eat at school? The short answer is that the professionals, OHA and ODE, have told us that it is if we follow these guidelines. So we're going to follow those guidelines to a T as well. The protocol that I explained to you earlier about how we're going to clean desks, how we're going to bring meals to the classroom, all of that meets ODE and OHA's guidelines to make it safe. For the physical distancing impact in the elementary hybrid, this is where the numbers get pretty challenging based on some of the information I gave you last week. As you can see, the change of color, that all of this has been updated. Class sizes now would be 13 to 14, so that limits the number of kids we can have in a day. Because the survey has come back pretty solidly, that 42% of our families wish to keep kids at home. It's a challenge. That means that doing an elementary hybrid, not LIPI, but elementary hybrid, would mean a substantial redistribution of staff, and the likelihood of students keeping their current teacher is small. This is a huge shift from building to building to be able to staff buildings appropriately and make sure that we have enough teachers in building to meet those needs also. On a given day, if you think about these numbers, about 30% of our students will be attending in person, and 70% will be accessing instruction online, which also puts us in a very difficult spot of how do teachers teach in that scenario and provide service to the kids who are at home while addressing the kids that are in front of them. And we have spent hundreds of hours, literally, trying to figure this out. And the short answer is that you have to have a dual system to be able to make that happen. And that is a hard thing for teachers to do. Some other data points for you. Well, Lisa, this is all yours.
Well, it's all of ours, right? But we want to thank Tim because the number crunching was going on today as well. But, and it's actually higher. He really did say today to me that, more than 90% have responded with the repeats and some changes to our data. But if we haven't heard from families, our individual schools have been making individual phone calls because we want to make sure that we know that everybody has the, placement for their learning model, at their decision making, and not having a. So, again, like John said, it's about the 40-ish want to remain online, and about the 59-60% want to indicate that they are preferring an in-person. We did break down, the different, populations of our schools, and we have some, data, but basically, you're saying it's about that 50, 60, and 40%, wanting CDL, whether it's specialized programs, ELL, special ed, any other of those programs that may be, wanting, a hybrid. So, let's look at those together.
So these are surveys that we're doing, that say we move forward with the LIPI/hybrid and whatnot, will there be a decision point where we'll send our parents a note saying, are you going online or are you going hybrid?
We're there, Matt,
Okay.
and I'll explain that in just a second, yes. For us to be able to, what we need to do in a short amount of time, where usually we have a summer and spring to plan, is we would have to flip our buildings and master schedules in real time in 2 weeks. That is hard work, especially while you have kids in class and you're teaching and working. What we would be expecting of our principals, and especially our main office staff, is a Herculean effort to pull this off. So what we have told parents in our survey is, you need to make a decision this month, and that's been challenging. Parents are reticent, they don't know we've given them information, we're making individual phone calls, and it's hard to make that choice. What we thought, just to illustrate that a little bit more, is we sent the survey out the Wednesday after we came back from break. Or excuse me, that's not correct. The Friday after we came back from break, and we asked that next Wednesday that it be completed. Since that Wednesday deadline, we have made thousands of individual phone calls to families who weren't able to fill it out for one reason, to have that conversation and answer questions with them. Right now, we're at about 88-89% completion rate. We needed that information to be able to plan. Without it, we didn't know how to staff programs in general. So we have made them make a choice. We have given them a potential out. If there's a circumstance that changes by March 15th, principals can hear that, and if they have room to make that change, they can make that change, but it's not a guarantee. But there's no way for us to plan this without giving them that deadline. What you're seeing on the screen right now is the variance between buildings. Our low is Deep Creek, Damascus, where about 37% of the families chose to stay online fully. Our high is Highland, which is about 46.5%, chose to stay online. That's the change I alluded to last week, which was so substantive regarding our staffing, because our original survey gave us about 25 to 30% wanting to stay online. This is a big change. So it caused some significant staffing challenges. What you'll see in the next slide is the demographic choices. And this was enlightening today. Today was the first real day we had an opportunity to dive into this with principals. You're going to see a very interesting challenge to grapple with. If you look at our BIPOC families, more than white families, they want to stay online. And they're higher than our average in general. That we didn't expect. So when we talk about voices inside of the data, we need to ask the question of which population, if we move to a hybrid, is going to be served best based on what they're asking us for. That's a significant talking point. We didn't have any great answers for you as principals today, but I was glad that we came to that realization so we could start the discussion.
So, there are some student data points that do support, limited in-person instruction. And so we're sharing this with you. Although, the state report cards always have things that are basic, like attendance. Attendance has changed this year, and we have really just looked at it in two ways. We've looked at it as, are you checking in? Do we have contact with you? But are you engaged? Because engagement is quite different when it's comprehensive distance learning. That district average right now for attendance is 87%. It does peak in grade 3 at 95. You can see where the Ks and the 1s are, and then it declines as you move up in grades. And you'll see that the high school has the lowest of those attendance and engagement. Attendance by program is also listed here, so you can see that as well. But all along, along with our mission and vision, it's always about student safety and health and safety first. And our data is the concern about the reports that we're not hearing about child abuse, we're not hearing about suicide ideation, we're not hearing and having that social connection that we as students and the community need. So more than a 50% reduction in suicide screenings that we hear from through our CPS and through our police and other agencies that help with those things. Those are our concerns. Obviously, they're the community's concerns, they're all of our concerns here too.
And going back to, as a review again, we are following the metrics with what we shared with you all, and the board has committed to follow the metrics along the way, the health metrics. And if you follow the chart that is presented tonight, you'll see that of January 29th, if you will, that's tomorrow, isn't it? Today. The current rate, in Clackamas and Multnomah, 226 and 243 respectively. And if you're reading the metrics, you'll see that this places us, our district, in the elementary on-site hybrid transition phase, which is, we like to begin with the LIPI if the board should wish. The next slide again is just an overview again of the process or the phases as a reminder. Again, about 2-3 weeks for the vaccines. I would probably say that's going to be 3 based on how it started. And ensuring that we have the inventory for that. Then another week to kind of set up and prep, communicate, as John indicated, and again, starting small with Libby in our small cohorts, and continuously phasing those in. And you might be asking, well, are those over weeks, or 2 weeks, or days? I'd like to leave that flexibility up to our schools in the sense that, so that we can slowly phase in. I know that if we were to say, let's do Libby at the high school level, our high school principals will want their seniors back first. So I want to make sure that we leave some flexibility and set the standard of how we're going to phase in, and allow that to happen organically at our schools. And, you know, Lisa and John and Lakeisha and Tracy and Michelle have really worked well with our principals to identify who's going to who they're going to invite back. And again, we cannot mandate students return. We can only offer them that invite through Libby. And so tonight, there's just a few things. Again, the facility question, I failed to put that on this list, but that is the question. The two main ones are the health metrics. Are we to continue to follow those metrics as mandatory or as advisory? And then second, are we going to begin Libby as proposed, or is there something else the board would like to see us do? That something else would be continue CDO.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for an incredibly heavy lift to bring us even to this point. I wanted to open up, were there any questions of the presentation before we move into, I'd like to set the stage for how we'll maybe discuss. I have a question. Engagement. How is that defined? Is that a kid logging on, turning off their screen, and Is there a measure of participation? Or could a student feasibly log on, turn off their screen, and disengage, and be counted as an engagement?
They can.
Okay, so it's literally just digital attendance.
It is.
My family's experience with that decision is that it's classroom by classroom,
Yes.
as to whether kids are permitted to turn off their cameras. I think most classes are. Okay. So, I think I'll try to form conclusions off of that myself, but, okay, sorry, any other questions? Okay, if I'm understanding, I'm gonna kind of regurgitate back what I heard, as it relates to a board decision. The board could stay silent, absent of any action, and the district has all the authorization it needs to continue to pursue limited in-person and hybrid instruction because both meet the criteria of the state. That's an option. Is that?
Close to correct, Chair, just a real quick correction on that one. We're in the phase where we're planning for that and can start to implement, yes.
But pursuing limited in-person. Thank you for that correction. I like to be corrected rather than spew something. Okay, so to reframe, the board can stay silent, take no action, and the district has all the authorization it needs to continue to roll out limited in-person instruction without any necessary consideration of the vaccine rollout or anything of that sort. So that's on the table. It would, and I'm speaking as a single member here, I think this is a moment that the board owes clarity to our community and our district leaders. So it is not my preference that we stay silent right now. But I would like to see some conversation regarding these three efforts, or these three questions that were posed to us. That is my preference, but I'm not gonna captain a ship that has no interested people behind it. So are there general thoughts as we try to frame this conversation?
I think we should tackle one at a time, because I think they're
Let's talk about the begin phasing of limited in-person instruction. As a point of reference, limited in-person instruction is for special populations, which I've heard defined as LE 1 and 2, which you said, you defined LE.
Learning essentials.
Learning essentials 1 and 2, so these are students who are experiencing disabilities.
Correct.
And particularly complex disabilities.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some additional specialized programs too, beyond LE 1 and 2, Structured Skills Center, PATH, a few others, but they're specialized programs that students are identified for.
Okay. And that limited in-person instruction for LE 1 and 2 applies to every building in our district.
Every building with a program, not all of them have a program.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. It also includes, in a previous iteration, we also had students who have D's and F's, was presented at one point, and English language learners. Were there other special populations of students to which this might apply that calling out wouldn't be?
Special education students who are not assigned to a specialized program would also be using selected ESP Spanish learners.
And some of our students in a couple of our alternative programs as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there other questions related to limited in-person instruction?
Yeah, there's, one of the updates from last week says, there's to meet the needs, based on relational, social, emotional, curricular, instructional, assessment. Who is making those determinations? How are students being recommended?
We presented a scaled system to principals today, and then principals and teachers who have that direct relationship will make the final decisions within their building.
We've identified some screening criteria, the systematic we could apply that would help us prioritize.
And remind me on the phasing of the virus, or the shot. Are the teacher population within those groups in the first phase, or are they spread out amongst the phases?
And James will add more to this if necessary, but we had to kind of meet the county in the middle on that one, because every district was a little different in how they were identifying Lippy. So OHA made a decision. We're matching the best we can to that decision, but principals also had that question today, so just to put everybody at a little bit at ease, is we're aiming for end of February, beginning of March. If OHA is able to keep their 2,000 vaccine a day quota for this region, we'll reach 64,000 by February 28th, which is the number of educators in this region. So I don't imagine, unless something fails at that level, that all of our staff won't have had the opportunity before kids come back for that first phase. Does that answer the question?
No, but,
Can we now, if you need to, sir?
well, no, I just, I'm thinking of, like sped teachers. It seems like that's a high percentage of those who would come back in Lippy. Are they in the first phase? I can't remember.
Absolutely. They got their invitations this week, and most of them are
Some have
scheduled.
been vaccinated today.
And so they're vaccinated starting today, so approximately 30 days for the second vaccine. So end of February, come March, 10 days after that. Okay. I'm just trying to get a sense. And so a good portion of that, the teacher population would actually more than likely be vaccinated.
Yes,
at that
including
point.
bus drivers, it's not just teachers, because we have to have that support staff vaccinated, custodians, bus drivers, food service workers, everybody who we need to make this work.
I know Dennis
Even
Conservation is pretty.
Even our subs, our buildings have identified 2 or 3 subs that they will have, so we will also, they're also on our list, for vaccine.
So sorry, I thought I heard earlier that like they're getting the first vaccine and then we're doing Lippy, or they're getting both vaccines and then they can return?
My understanding is that they are, if you go down today, well, whenever your appointment is, you'll schedule your second vaccine. I don't know that the second vaccine will happen before Libby starts at this point. That's a scheduling issue, but everybody will have had the opportunity for the first, which gives them 75% immunity.
If the board so wish that we wait, then that's the thing. But if we are following the metrics like we have been, the metrics now say we can begin to transition into that,
And the metrics were established before.
they were established before the vaccine was came
So
about.
that's just even having the first vaccine is an extra level of protection
Yes,
that wasn't afforded under these guidelines.
correct.
Right.
Myra, you had a question?
Yeah, just clarification, so then phase 3, the prep and elementary, that would start, that prep is referring to hybrid prep?
That's the, safety protocol, rehearsals of training,
For hybrid.
change, correct, and
Yeah.
How far apart are these phases on here? Because we've got phase 1 and 2 of Lippy, and then prepping, and then moving in, and I'm just, again, I keep running out of dates, and I'm just a little bit leery of going in with a 1 dose on the vaccine and trying to look at what even getting everyone through the first dose. If there's a reason for a second dose, then I feel like we should be looking at the second dose. If it was going to be effective with 1, then we would have 1. Why do we have 2? Because it needs to be more effective. So that's kind of what I'm mulling, is if we're going to make sure this is good, then,
I'm right there too, I mean, it's already starting to evolve in California, it's kind of scary where it's going, so I mean,
it's here in Oregon too.
yeah.
Yeah.
West Coast,
And
yeah.
Washington.
Yeah, West Coast, yeah.
Yeah.
But, no, it's just scary to consider, and me personally, I would be at ease if they had both vaccinations before we did this.
I agree with Chris and Amanda. I think that, the difference of a month to get that additional vaccine and protection is really important to moving forward.
So, so I want to go back kind of to what I think Blake was talking about. So if we're not going back into it in a broader sense, is there still then the opportunity, the students that have been identified through either their previous, learning plan or what has come about where some kids need to come back? Is that still something that can happen if we don't have general LIPI available? And is LIPI a general program, or that's only, clarify it for me again one more time, LIPI versus hybrid?
Yeah, I think if you look up here, and this is the chart, and this is kind of where we started with limited in person. When we were in distance learning before these advisory metrics changed, one of the options was comprehensive distance learning and some limited in-person instruction. And at the time, we were asked not to start because our numbers were spiking. Now the metrics changed, and we're kind of at that, yes, we're over in the orange, but the way schools are often starting is you start with that small population. It gives you a chance to get our kids supported and transitioned with that 2 hours a day. And then it also helps get the staff to get used to those protocols so that when you start bringing more kids in, staff have their feet under them as well. So it's kind of a gradual phasing is kind of what the vision is.
Chris, that's why we didn't put dates on the phasing, and then you asked that question as well, because of that very thing. We want to be able to start small and then begin to scale, and we continue to get into a routine of, one, coming back to school, two, making sure those protocols are in place. Because the protocols are gonna be important for the safety and health of everyone in the building. So figure if we start small, that is the best way to begin. It's really kind of been the philosophy of our district of everything that we've done. We start small and then scale. Try to make sure that we get it right before you go big and then it all implodes on you. So I know James and Lisa and John are working with, also with our associations as well in order to ensure that we have a proper MOU in place as well. All those things have to be worked out as well, so we'll continue to move forward, which is again another reason why I don't want to commit to dates, because I want to be able to have that flexibility. Because if we put dates out, then it becomes a scenario of they kept using the how to put the genie back in the bottle if we don't meet that date. And I'm finding some of our neighbors are doing that right now. They put out dates and now they have to come back and retract. And I just think we need to have that flexibility within our district to do what's best for our community and our schools.
My thought process on this is that these metrics were developed before the vaccine came out, so we're going to have an additional layer of protection for our staff, which is awesome. We're probably not gonna get this done for at least 30 days, probably, I mean, best case.
Yeah.
And so at that point, the majority of the staff should have their vaccines. It's gonna be small scale, 20 cohort, not 100 cohort, and we can just start ramping it up very, very, very slowly. But we're also then meeting the needs of those very critical students, students with critical needs, if you will.
John, you want to talk a little bit about athletics and activities as well as to how they're starting up?
Could I ask a question that's right on that?
Sure.
I imagine that in our special populations, every experience is different. But what for the last, since the fall, let's say, what does a day of school look like? Or an LE1 or LE2, what does that engagement look like? What burdens are on the family to provide those supports, and what burdens are on the school to provide those supports?
Yeah, I would say for, every family it's different, because every child is different, every plan is individualized. I think our teachers have, just developed phenomenal working relationships with parents, knowing that they need to partner with parents to try to help their child at home. It's, there's definitely, huge successes. Our teachers have been very creative and innovating, finding new ways to meet the needs of students, but the reality is learning this way is very challenging and doesn't work well for some kids. And so that's where our interest with limited in-person options is we can begin to backfill those areas where it hasn't been as effective, so that we can, offer a more well-rounded experience, if you will, within the limits from what we can do.
Could even be more direct here. Many of the IEPs
we've written for these students are mobility things, getting them through the hall, learning to walk this way, physical goals
Yeah.
that now parents are expected to do with assistance online from a teacher, and it's far from perfect.
Very challenging.
Carrying this train of thought, for an English language learner, what does a day in the life of engagement look like since the fall?
I think it depends, I know that I won't speak for Cutting, but, we've done a lot of collaborating because we're both specialist programs. There's definitely the small groups are continuing where students are getting their ELL services in that way. I think that, any student that is struggling, with learning, and needing that support, it does fall to parents. And, as parents are working and, trying to juggle multiple children, that's gonna have its impact as well. And so I think that, the more independent the learner, the easier it is to access learning. The more support a learner needs, regardless of program, the more challenges there's gonna be with this in terms of effectiveness.
Okay. How many D's and F's do we have in our senior level?
We're coming to the end of the semester. The grades will be done next week. I didn't think to look into that before we came tonight, so I don't have that data for you.
And I'm not asking anybody to have to say something that they then retract because they had, but is our concern for credit deficient seniors higher than previous years? Like, do we feel like that is a risk?
Yeah.
We are higher, we're not as high, believe me, we were anticipating 40% at one point, we're at about the 20% level for F. I didn't look at it by grade level, but I could, guess that it's consistent across grade levels, so about 20% of our seniors are in jeopardy.
Okay, so I guess thank you, and all of us, because all of us come from a different frame of reference. That's why a month matters to me. Like, that is credit recovery, or we don't see those seniors walk. That is rendering support to families that have borne this burden. Not saying that our staff hasn't. The innovations that I see in my home are unreal, and we don't have that experience with the complexities that others do. But we do have special supports inside of our home, and I marvel at what our staff can do. But families have borne the burden of this. Seniors will fail. That's the month's delay. And so that is why I would personally be in favor of phasing in limited in-person instruction as quickly as we can, while also ensuring to the best of our abilities that all of these staff that we're asking to be on the front lines have first availability of this vaccine.
And we want to add more into that because Carla's been texting me. She's a panelist tonight, and she is in the weeds on those grades if you want more information, but that 20% is double what we usually see at this point when we're in person.
Yeah.
Carla, you want to share?
I'm here, I just don't know, it's hard for me to hear the specific question, so you tell me what the specific question is, but I am following the general conversation.
Carla, thank you. I asked John specifically how many Fs we have, and if there's a concern about credit deficiency that exceeds previous years in our seniors in particular.
Yes, there is. We had 1,700 Fs during quad 1, which is about twice as many as we normally have. And that was distributed among 792 students across our 3 big high schools and Ray Academy. We have a multi-pronged incomplete and credit recovery process, which is a combination of mitigating Fs so that we remove them from the GPA so they don't discourage kids from continuing to try to get those credits. A scaled credit recovery system where we're leveraging Edgenuity as well as pulling Google Classroom units that have been failed so that students don't have to retake the entire class, but only the portion of the class that they failed or did not pass. And we are paying teachers for Wednesdays at a stipended rate. And then we're also paying teachers during their prep time on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. So basically we're we're buying them an extra prep time. So they'll work with the kids during their prep time during the school day, and then they do their actual prep after school, and we pay them for that. And this past quad 2, we paid teachers to work during 8th period, which was an open period in the schedule. We'll do that again during quad 4. And then finally, we are beginning planning for an 8 to 9 week 5th quad over the summer that will be a full court press for all of our students who received an incomplete last spring, and any student who did not receive a passing grade this year. We are hoping that we will be able to make a very strong dent. We are fortunate to have a good chunk of money from Measure 98 that we did not spend on other things that we had budgeted for, and because we couldn't travel and take people to professional learning, and a lot of the professional learning became free. And so what we've been able to do is save that money and pivot a large chunk of it towards our credit and incomplete recovery, and really examining what we can do to encourage kids to stay engaged instead of give up. But Blake, I do share your concern that it without full court press, it will make a dent on our graduation rate. There is no doubt about it. And it is also why we have to have a robust alternative ed program and multiple ways to address our credit recovery challenges.
Carla, how are our 9th graders doing? I know the 9th graders on track numbers have been growing in the last couple of years. As semester 1 comes to an end, what is the prediction for them?
I don't have that prediction, Myra. I can get that for you. I haven't pulled the data from the 9th grade on track after quad 1, so we'll have to see. I did get to sit in with both of our comprehensive high schools who have the houses when we presented to ODE last week, and on the 9th grade on track. And they're doing some pretty remarkable stuff, and in some cases reporting better connection with kids, because the kids who they were struggling with absenteeism by them not coming to school, they are now having more connection with them. But conversely, the kids who they have lost connection with, they're having a harder time engaging because they have no way to kind of wrangle them. So it's almost gone to 2 extremes of either kids that they struggled with, they've been able to pull in, or they've completely lost. So they do a lot of, both of our high schools are doing a ton of home visits, phone calls, bringing supplies to families, and providing as much support as possible. But yeah, I can get you the data. I don't have that.
Yeah, and just to let our audience know, that doesn't mean that our sophomores and juniors are not just
Yes.
We did look, what I will say, Myra, is we did look at our grad rates, and I think Tim presented this last week at the board meeting, but the 9th grade on track prediction is that if you look at our students who are juniors, were the first cohort of students who were part of the 9th grade on track houses. And they are showing up very strongly in our data. So we have high hopes that our juniors will continue that trajectory into next year. But our students who are failing, we're also really concerned about losing them. So we have to maintain what we've been doing, and then a full court press to catch up those kids who are struggling. Oh, and Ryan Blasock wanted me to make sure and tell you, he just texted me, don't forget Springwater Trail is also doing those things. I was talking about Gresham and Barlow, but Springwater.
We have 3 high schools.
Yes. Sorry, Ryan.
Carla, I will add in, Tim was doing numbers for you as you were talking. There are 230 9th grade students failing 1 or more class at this point. The class, yep, so that's at this point, and we still have tomorrow.
Yeah, and I don't know how that compares to previous years. So we'll have to do some calculations on that.
So, Chair, what you're getting to, and I know we've all been grappling this as leadership teams, from the TLC down to teacher and union level, we do have a staff safety issue. It is clear and present, given the virus. There's no other way to determine that. We also have a clear and present huge impact these decisions are making on students who we always put at the center. That is a difficult ethical conundrum that we're experiencing. I would love to just say, yep, staff, that's it, that's how we make this decision. But the unintended consequences, I can't even predict for you. That's where we all learn.
I'd like to add to that and just say, I want to be clear to the board and to the community that we as a staff have not determined that the risk to students is greater than the risk to staff, and therefore we're going to bring kids back. Public health officials have told us that if we follow the guidelines that we've outlined for the board tonight, that we can prevent the spread of this virus. And so we believe with a high degree of confidence that following these protocols, we can mitigate the risk. That doesn't mean we can eliminate it, but we do feel that we can mitigate the risk that is present for our staff and students by following these protocols. We've gotten our buildings ready. We are ready to train staff. And if we do those things, we feel that we can bring staff back safely and a small population of students back safely. This is not a staff wellness versus student wellness, and the two can't exist at the same time. That's not what we're bringing to the board tonight. Are there any further questions about a limited in-person instruction? Yeah, Chris.
Because I'm back on the slide that has the phases of, because I realize some people can't hear, so I'm gonna talk a little bit louder. The limited in-person instruction phases. And what it looks like, as I read through this, is that we're not addressing, that secondary grades until quite a ways into the steps. So whatever it is that's going on now with our freshmen and our sophomores and our juniors and our seniors, that's not necessarily going to be addressed.
That is limited in person. D's and F's are part of limited in person.
Are part of limited, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And that's, yeah, that's a.
Okay, then that wasn't clear in there, thank you. Which actually brings me to my other thing, which has been a long issue for me, is why we even have Fs. It's either passed or you need to go back and do it again. But labeling an F, doing an F, putting an F, just tells a student you failed. Why would I keep going? Instead, it says you need to continue and try again. You got most of it, like Carla was saying. You got most of it, let's finish it. But I really do.
Well, we'd like to update you on that because of this specific circumstance. It has given, ILT the ability to be listening to the needs of our students and knowing these D's and F's and the rates and the increases. And, our principals, working and a small committee, we have determined, that this year we have a no grade, instead of an F. And it gives them that time that's necessary to make up, the credit and the standards and the understanding. And so you will not actually see an F on the report card this year. You will see what is called a no grade, and we can go into details about that. But it's so, and then all of the things that Carla had talked about credit recovery, play into when that grade shows up.
Okay, because that wasn't clear. Yeah, okay.
Yes, that was part of the plan, is the no Fs. The student still needs to recover the credit and they still need to complete the class, but there's two impacts, is what Lisa said about it gives a sense of hope and redemption versus a finality of an F. And the other thing is that that NG is not calculated in their GPA. So sometimes it can be very defeating to look at a very low GPA when you still have to take the class. So it's not calculated in their GPA up front. And therefore, again, hopefully it builds that sense of they just don't have a grade yet versus they failed the class and, you know, that there's a sense of finality around that. And that's just for this year. Extending that beyond the summer of 2021 is an effort that we will be looking into with our administration.
I would like to thank Chris and the clarification around the grades and, you know, not giving students Fs, because if we're looking at coming back because of that 1 month, because people are failing right now, then we are really not doing our service or a good student or service to our students. And really, you know, taking that a step further and making sure that, you know, it's not, this 1 month isn't make or break an entire student's career or life, that we are really looking at our services holistically as it relates to their grades. So thank you, Chris, for really highlighting that question.
There is, I mean, there's on-time graduation though.
There is.
There is an end time where that no grade will affect someone's number of credits that they've recovered.
And I would like to see us do more about that. We're in a pandemic, right? A lot of students are dealing with a lot of struggles that are really out of their control. The most flexibility that we can offer, I would really like that. You know, if students are 1 course away from being able to graduate, I would like to see us show some leniency and as much as we can do this year to be able to make students successful and be able to graduate.
Graduation requirements, we certify, but are prescribed by Oregon Department of Education.
Correct.
Correct.
We don't have control of it.
We're gonna get to that moment in 4 months from now, where we're starting to draft that statement that the board, one of us, says, I certify that these kids have met the standard.
You.
I think so, whoever's gonna be there, right? I guess I'm asking, to what degree are the goalposts changing, or is the standard changing?
I think they've already changed, haven't they? We've already lowered those, earlier last year. So we are actually, if you remember, on the board meeting, I said we need to take board action to change those requirements, and we never did. We just were following ODE's requirements.
They've been added to the AR, as we've discussed about, there were some changes to the graduation where there's no more, trying to think, no, texting, but there were 3 or 4 changes that we put in the footnotes to an AR around the reductions that the state was allowing, and so we need to make that indication within the policy format. However, the date and the requirement of the number of credits is not determined by Gresham-Barlow.
But it's state.
But they do have a chance, if they're completing over the summer and the fall, they will become a part of our completers, just not on-time graduation.
Right.
Right. 50 seniors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those two.
If they graduate by August 31st, they go into this year's graduation data. It's anybody after August 31st that goes into next year's graduation data.
Hey, Carla, this is a rough question to put you on the spot with, but, you're probably most equipped to answer it, but if you can't, that's okay. Credit recovery, can you give me, first off, how many credits is a typical class? And if you see a credit deficient senior, at what number of credits deficient do you start to say, oh no, let's plan for 5th year or alternative program that can help get you there?
That's, well, good question, Blake. Here's what I'll say. Students earn, the way the credits work at high school level is that they earn credit, usually about a half a credit per class per semester, or a full credit per class for the whole year. So in a traditional brick and mortar, we have 7 periods a day. And so the students typically can earn up to 7 credits for the whole year. Half a credit, half of it during the first semester and half during the second, depending on their schedule and what credits they need. Some of them earn 6. the state has set a minimum threshold, which is part of our 9th grade on track, of 6 credits per year, because that's average of 6 over the course of 4 years, and 24 is what's required to graduate. So that's how the credits are distributed. When you ask at what point do we say, oh, this student needs more support, what we are doing is every student at the end of every grading period gets a very strong review, and what we're working on is having our teams review their progress even prior to the grading period. But they look at their students after every grading period and work to get those students who have failed into credit recovery immediately. At some point, and annually and biannually, counselors are working with the students to say, how do we get you caught up? What other classes do you need? And depending on how far behind a student falls, and if that student is still making effort and will come to summer school or other things, then they work from there. That's called a multi-tiered system of support process for the academic interventions. And at the high school level, that includes what are our credit recovery options for students who are falling further behind. And usually by the beginning of their senior year, if a student is still enrolled and still engaged, but more than 1 year off track by credits, in other words, 6 or more credits behind, then they might be having a conversation around, summer school, night school, maybe a 5th year, and again, depending on that student's goals. So there's a variety of options that they start to look at, usually during their, throughout their high school experience, but definitely depending on how far behind a student is and how old they are, that guides what sort of advice counselors are providing to students about their options.
Are there any support services that our district offer for students experiencing grief? My friend, her husband passed away, and her son was experiencing a lot of grief in the Park Rose district, and the student or the teachers did everything they could possible to make sure that that student progressed to the 2nd level, even when he was unable to perform. And so do we offer the same services to our students in moments of grief and trauma?
Yes. So, Rob, Director Sowers, we have counselors, and this is mental health counselors. We have a flight team every time that has a series of trained social workers and counselors who come together to provide immediate support to that student, their family, and then their peers and staff, depending on the circumstances, and then ongoing support at every school. We also have a counselor in special assignment who meets monthly with all of the counselors to ensure that they have professional learning that is ongoing around the sorts of supports they need to provide. And at the high school level, we have, in addition to a cadre of counselors, we have a licensed mental health social worker who provides that additional support. So yes, and when a school doesn't have the capacity themselves, they also work very closely with our counselor and special assignment to leverage the additional supports. And then finally, Michelle Cook has worked very hard to get mental health contracts in place for all of our schools. So sort of a collection of contracts with private agencies and the county offer a whole host of really intensive counseling and mental health supports that are available to this year for the first time, every student in every one of our schools.
But there's no allowances for grades.
Oh, for grades? Oh, yes. I mean, I think that is part of what kind of support can we give this student when they are going through a traumatic event in order for them to recover their credit, to recover their learning, to pause. Sometimes, I mean, we've had students who take time off and then when they come back, we push them right back into the classes and try to provide them the supports. But it's very individualized, because every student's circumstances are different. I've had students whose family members have died, and they want to work harder because it distracts them from their grief. And then there are students who completely check out, and then we have to adapt to them. So part of the world of supporting the students is being adaptive to what their specific needs are and then bringing the supports to them. Do we do it perfectly? I'm certain we have areas for growth. I would never want to say that we don't. But do we have a lot of those systems in place to provide the supports? Yes.
Are there any follow-on questions related to beginning of phasing of limited in-person instruction as proposed?
If a student is either selected or self-selects, family selects to be in Libby, and they realize it's not working for them, can they get back out and go back to CDL? And then are they back to CDL? We don't want students going in and out. Is that?
We would prefer not to have in and out, but yes, and they're living, we haven't talked about that specifically, I can't see why not.
But it's both, I mean,
Living
they are not.
It's a choice.
Yep.
It's a choice.
It's a choice, and if it's not working, they can go back to be
Yep.
just straight CDL.
Yep.
Okay, okay.
I'm gonna piggyback off of that, and then I don't wanna go too far, but we have received concerns from parents about saying, I don't want any student forced into hybrid instruction. My understanding is every family will have a choice for their student. Okay. That's a discussion about hybrid, not limited in person, but I felt like there was a good.
Even in limited in person, like, we cannot force, only invite, we cannot make it mandatory. And in some cases, we can't replace, the CDL with the P, in some cases, not all.
Okay. I'd like to treat these questions individually. It's sounding like we have, information, and I think we're always going to be short of perfect information. But we do have opportunities, we have a decision potential tonight that I would prefer to be taken as an action. So, how about this? As chair, I would move to begin phasing of limited in-person instruction for special populations as proposed.
No second.
Okay.
I would amend that to say after second phase vaccinations.
Okay, could you state your amendment, Robin?
To do exactly what you said, but after our staff receive the second vaccination.
Okay.
I would second that.
Okay, so there's an amendment that's been moved by Robin, seconded by Chris, to read, to begin phasing of limited in-person instruction at the completion of the second vaccine for staff. I'm checking that wording by you, Robin. Okay. Any discussion about the amendment?
I just feel like if the second dose is part of the plan of the vaccination, that should be part of what we do. That if we're going into it as part of it, sometimes the first one doesn't fully work. So that's just part of covering as much as we can and making sure that we're not going to have staff or older students become ill. Because our older high school students are adults. They're subject to the same. So that's my rationale on wanting us to wait and just get that second dose. And it's an encouragement then as well for staff to follow through on their appointment and get that second dose.
So is that, when is that number, the magical number of the second dose? Is it after?
It's about 2 or 3 weeks
Well,
after.
I know what the time frame is, but, is it 1 month after we get, the last of the phase 4? Or what's the metric behind that? Because that's a very broad, statement.
And what I'm understanding is that limited in person for the specialized populations that we prioritize has to do with the wave one employees that we've already forwarded and they've already started the
So
process.
wave one, so is it, so would that be an additional motion to, include only the wave one? Or because the promotion is that everybody's got their second vaccine?
Do we skip the first question, or the first question says this is just a continuing link for next?
No, we're talking about.
We started the whole conversation around Lippy, I think. Well, I guess I would like to clarify that briefly, that you bring that up. This is whether or not we treat the safety metrics as mandatory advisory does not change whether we can enter limited in-person instruction.
Right, because if you look at the norm chart,
Because of the chart.
it does say that we should be transitioning.
So my thinking was we could handle that as a second consideration. So, I'm gonna need some Robert's rules of this here, but the amendment said second vaccine in staff. Matt has brought up a concern about how we are defining that second vaccination, and for public edification, and so that I'm making sure I'm hearing this properly. The concern is over the timeline and supply. So, right now, we're looking at about 3 weeks to have everybody, according to OHA, all the waves have access to their first vaccine.
If everything goes as we.
If everything goes like, James, correct me if I'm wrong, but the first vaccine, I think it's a 21 to 24 day, you have to get or you should get the second one. So if you got the vaccine today, which many staff did, they were downtown in droves today. If you get the vaccine today, in 3 weeks, you should get your second, which means by the end of the month, those people that were in the first wave should have their second one by the beginning of March, if everything goes as planned by OHA. So that first wave of Lippy, if we stay with this schedule, and it's completely out of our hands, they should be ready by March.
Wave one.
Wave one.
Yeah.
But if I heard right, wave one is not all Lippy employees. I mean, there's no way to know that that is all.
That is true.
It's the specialized programs, those staff is assigned to those specialized programs for kids that were already in those programs before all this started. Those staff were in wave one.
Okay, but we just spent a lot of conversation about credit deficient or Ds and Fs
Yes.
in students, but our secondary is phase 4, or is wave
Yes,
4.
they're down, they are down further, especially for general ed, that is correct.
So our most optimistic timeline, if I'm hearing that right, is 3 weeks from now, our wave 4 are getting their first vaccination. Most
Yes.
optimistically, 3 weeks later, they're getting their second vaccination, so what, 6 weeks from now?
Mm-hmm. About the second week of March.
Okay.
Mhm.
And then we have, okay.
Chair, can I give a point of clarification
Yes.
with vaccines? I think it's for the record, if you have to say, have the opportunity, because we can't determine that they get the shot, and we can't ask if they've gotten it either.
That's a good clarification, that they've had the opportunity. Yeah.
And they will, I mean, we'll give that.
Okay,
So what you have right now is an amendment that we can't do it until the vaccine. So I would
Second.
request that, no, that's already been the motion made with Robin and I. So I would suggest you do a vote to that, up or down, and then we can clarify that motion with the new motion of opportunity.
You would further amend it, if you.
Do you want a further
If
amendment
they
now?
approve that amendment, you could make another amendment to adjust the wording further before you vote on these.
so
We
approving the
can do that?
amendment is not approving the
Okay.
motion.
So,
Is that
so
right?
wait, I want to
Right.
clarify with
Okay.
Sarah. So what Catrice just said was, we could amend the second amendment to say, offer, that
Given the opportunity.
given the opportunity for the second dose.
Correct.
As well as we could specify
What phase, or
what,
what?
what wave.
Yeah, that's.
And then you got a really cumbersome, so,
Okay.
so to keep it simpler,
So,
I want people to come back to work as soon as they can. Like, there are teachers who are ready to come back. There's some of us who are ready to come back in the fall. Vaccine or no vaccine, as long as we met the metrics. It looks like we're meeting the metrics. So, whoever wants to come back, come back. We can't force anybody to come back. We can't force anybody to get vaccine. So who really wants to empower and inspire kids and you're ready to come back, come back. And if you don't want to, don't. We can't force anybody to do anything they don't want. I mean, we've heard about people turning in doctor's notes that they're not gonna come back even if they do get their vaccine. And our kids are suffering, our families are suffering.
Any further discussion about the amendment?
But for
That is-
clarification, just
Yes,
to
please.
go to ask some clarification on what Maida said. So if we're offering a teacher their job back and they don't want to take it, do they still collect unemployment, or how would that work, you know, as it refers to compensation? Because I've heard employers talk about, oh, everyone wants to come back, you wouldn't be here if you didn't, you know, if you didn't feel safe, when really, you know, there's an economic impact to that. So are our teachers still going to be paid if they decide not to come back and if it's their choice?
Dave, you want to address
Yeah.
that, Billy?
So, that's a complex question, but I think simply I can answer it, that we are going to allow staff that have medical doctor's notes to be able to work in the comprehensive distance learning environment. So technically, our licensed staff will either be back in person, limited in person, or hybrid, or whatever that looks like in the building, or those that cannot because they have doctor's notes, they will be in the comprehensive distance learning, which means they will still be working, for the school district. So in essence, all of our licensed employees will be employed, through the remainder of this year. Again, some people have doctor's notes that state they cannot come back, and they will get reevaluated. And so we will then get fitness for duty reports from their physicians. But for between now and the end of the year, our licensed employees will either be back in the building or continuing comprehensive business learning.
But there are many people who can't get doctor's notice. Maybe they themselves are fine, but they live with somebody who's that's sick, right? And so to say that, you know, all of our teachers want to come back and that we're, you know, making this decision and only the people who are going to be in the classrooms are the ones who feel 100% safe. I just, like, if that was the case, I wouldn't have any problem being like, yeah, it's your choice, you feel safe, you're healthy and so forth. But as this is like someone's job and there's an economic impact that might force somebody to make a decision to work in an unsafe environment where they could possibly be infected, like, I don't feel comfortable about that. And I want to make sure that we are allowing all of our staff, everyone who comes through, to be as safe as possible. COVID-19 is not a joke. It's continuously evolving, becoming more infectious. And I just lost a friend this last week. He was 32 years old and he died 3 days ago of COVID-19.
Is there further discussion about the amendment?
So I'd like to go back to Sarah's because I'm hearing what Myra is saying. And I don't think the motion that, the amendment that we have is requiring the second, but more the option to make sure everyone had an opportunity to get it, which again pushes us out a little bit further, but it's that opportunity to make sure that everyone has had their chance to get it. So do we need to, Sarah, amend the motion to just clarify?
I think what Sarah's saying is we should vote on the current amendment, then we can amend it further. Is that what you're saying?
That was my understanding, yeah.
So we have to vote on the amendment. Okay, so as it stands now, I would recommend that we vote no on the amendment so we can clean it up,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay, so, again, the vote here is over the amendment to begin phasing of limited in-person instruction after staff has received their second vaccine. No other discussion. All those in favor?
So is that everyone, or?
That was the way the
Right,
amendment was.
That's exactly how
Yeah.
it's read. So
Yeah,
if you
that's how
have
it's read.
any questions about that,
You have questions?
it is not expressed in so the conversations we had about the waves is not addressed in this amendment. The conversations we've had about opportunity versus actual vaccination is not addressed in the amendment. Okay? This amendment says when
Everybody.
staff have their second vaccine, when all staff then we can begin phasing of limited in-person instruction. That's what that's what this amendment reads right now. So, is there any other discussion? I'm sorry that this gets so confused. I think being precise here is important.
Oh, yeah, it's very important.
So wait, what would the new amendment be if we got rid of this one?
Well, we got,
Whatever is
we
proposed.
gotta vote for this
I
one
would
first.
recommend, if you're going to do another amendment, maybe whoever makes that
Listen.
amendment, to write it out on a piece of paper, so you have everything written before you actually make it in front of the group.
Okay.
It helps to clarify things.
You want to use it?
But, okay, so if there's no other discussion about that amendment, does anybody want me to reread it? No? Okay. All those in favor of that amendment? Any opposed? Aye?
Aye.
Okay. So that amendment fails.
Okay.
So then we're back to the original motion on the table, which is to begin phasing of limited in-person instruction as proposed. I presume that there's going to be a recommended amendment. So you'd want to move to make that amendment, and you're welcome to use the whiteboard. It looks like Chris is dialing one up.
I'm trying to get to one, Myra, if you want to do it at the same time, but,
Tell me what is it?
trying to get to it.
So if I could get
I'm gonna
clarification,
stand up and
while
I'm
they're
gonna come over
thinking
here by. Okay.
the training that's required for Lifty, that's gonna be required, can that be done at any time, because we've already provided that time?
Yes, we do,
So-
and thank you for that flexibility, absolutely. So that's, you see on the phasing, where it says, continue with training, preparation.
Oh, this week one, okay,
Yeah,
so we're
there are
talking,
limitations on the number of, how many people can have
Right.
together as well, so it'll go on throughout.
And
And then we'll have to do some, but there are 160.
yeah.
Sorry, I couldn't stand up.
I gotta get your water.
Oh, man, yeah, it's just one water.
Yeah, so, right, so ask, we take out that.
Okay, okay.
So, if, we have to do,
I think you're in one of the pieces, but we should have to change the with us, probably not.
No, that's, no, that's.
But you are on the yeah, you guys are in you're in the educator zone at the end of our wave.
I have 8 o'clock. I'm gonna put us into recess until 8:10.
Okay.
So for those listening, 8:10 PM, we will be back here, to proceed.
so, Sharon,
Yeah. All right, welcome back. We're gonna reconvene our meeting, and, to catch folks up where we're at, there's a motion on the table, to begin phasing of limited in-person instruction as proposed, and, I believe we're entering, this part of the meeting with an amendment, so.
So I move to amend that Lippy can phase in after a second dose vaccine has been made available to relevant staff supporting Lippy.
Second.
Okay, so it has been moved by Myra, seconded by Chris, to amend the motion that limited in-person instruction can phase in after the second dose of vaccine has been made available to relevant staff who support limited in-person instruction. Any discussion?
I do. This is for the superintendent. What kind of problems does this cause?
What kind of problem will this cause?
Yeah, or timing and, whatnot?
Timing.
Or interpretation?
Yes, timing is going to be an issue for us, but it's going to be an issue, period, Matt.
What?
It's going to be an issue, period, because we're going to have the flexibility to be able to roll this in. And just to be clear, Lippy is just, they're small groups, no larger than 20. And as the classroom you saw today, we can't even get 20 kids in that classroom because of the limitations of
13, 14.
space. Yes, and this is elementary, so think about high school.
What is how are we defining relevant in this stage?
Any staff who is needed to provide the adequate instruction and support to the students. So that would include, for example, our cafeteria staff who would be preparing the meals for our kids, the bus driver who would be driving our kids here to receive that limited instruction. Anyone who we need to provide those supports. And that varies by student.
Thank you for the clarification.
Further clarification, logistically, is that anything short of all four ways? If we approve this as the motion, is there any interpretation from district leadership that this is not all four ways?
I don't think it means all four ways.
It does not.
It means that you can start with.
Because we're able to prioritize staff. As the doses become available, we are able to prioritize staff to our specific needs. So this would allow us to identify students needing those supports, extend the invitation, and then prioritize the staff necessary to support those students.
That's what it says to me as well.
Okay, a follow-on to that then. In the most optimistic scenario, which I think we're operating as current scenario, I know you're hesitant to put a date on the board, but I'm filling in the variables. When does that make that happen?
If things go as planned with the vaccines, as we noted in the phasing, at max here, 3 weeks from now, again, everything happens as it's supposed to, as identified on the phasing proposal.
Plus a week.
Plus a week after that second.
That's right, sorry.
So March.
Yeah. 4 weeks out.
The 1 week right underneath there is where we will begin to bring folks back and train and prepare and then begin looking.
4 weeks out.
I mean, so that means that staff is able to identify people, identify all relevant staff, and that they are vaccinated by tomorrow.
No.
I mean, if.
Oh, you mean get the first one?
Yes.
Sorry.
Right? Am I hearing that right? If that's the time estimate, for those who are listening, I have a lot of confused looks, so I realize that I am probably wrong
So
here.
our wave one staff have already started being vaccinated, but there's somewhat like two different phases of wave one. So we have part of our staff that has been identified as wave one, and they've already started, and they'll go for the next 5 days. And then the second portion of wave one, with the other wave one staff we identified, they're gonna get their first shot the following week. So from that, we'll have all wave one staff members having both shots, within the next 3 weeks, plus the additional week, so 4 weeks out.
But that read has been made available, doesn't mean that it has to have happened.
Correct.
Correct.
We can't mandate them to get the vaccine.
So if everyone who's getting the vaccine is making a second appointment on the spot, so they're receiving their second availability, those who selected to take the vaccine are getting a second appointment before they leave the site. At least that's how I understand it. I'm in the last wave, so I don't, haven't gone yet myself to experience it.
I'm trying not to, my concern with that definition is that we did talk about, students who have Ds and Fs at the secondary level, but our secondary instructors are in wave 4. That's the concern that I have about that definition. Am I misinterpreting, am I hearing you're now accelerating that relevant staff up out of wave 4, or is that not wave 4? Like, am I misunderstanding that?
We have not moved the secondary, they are in wave 4. I'm not even sure if we can.
We're not.
OHA has defined who, what.
But I will say,
Lippy providers can be in wave 1.
Right.
so we have identified specific, secondary staff that would be involved in Lippy.
Okay.
In the first wave. Excellent. So we do have some identified folks that were there.
But that might not be the individuals that, like, speaking of, it would have been Michelle, special program.
In Ray.
So if a student is failing a science class, that the support that student is receiving has already been identified to be in wave 1.
Not necessarily, so that you understand, Chair, I see where you're going. If you are a student who has intense needs related to a disability, those staff K-12 have been identified, they're in wave 1. Other staff in alternative programs, SSC and PASS, are in wave 1 as well, because some of those are secondary programs also. But you are correct, that if you have a student who doesn't have a disability, other things, who has failed a class, that's way further down the road, general ed staff. So they wouldn't be in that wave 1 or 2 at this point, probably 3.
Which now we're looking at end of February, like to get first shot?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think Carla Gay also spoke to the fact that we have in quad 3 that's just about ready to start, we have credit recovery and credit completion opportunities.
Correct.
Which will be part of, I think, supporting some of our students that are struggling. So for those seniors that may not necessarily be on track, and then identifying for those that have failed, opportunities for them to recover that credit on an ongoing basis, whether it's quad 3 or quad 4, or as you pointed out in the summer.
That's a key distinction. We
Yeah.
do have supports in place for those
Already.
students who need that already.
Right.
Living
Comprehensive
on
distance learning?
It didn't, within comprehensive distance learning, it's a team-oriented outreach approach, engagement approach. Meeting with them after school, it's part of the multi-tiered systems of support that we're slowly developing. So those supports are in place. They will be enhanced when teachers have the vaccine further down the road, but they're in place.
So Lippy would be another layer on top of the things we're already doing, because the challenge started last spring. And so Carla's team has been basically working with the high schools to continue to address this issue, this whole time. So it's not like we're waiting to start to tackle the issue. Lippy would be another way to work on it when we get there.
Yeah, I guess, and, Board, I absolutely speak up because I'm not trying to, my concern is within comprehensive distance learning, we have, I don't know, double the amount of non-complete that we would typically have.
Yes.
Comprehensive distance learning, so this is my linear track. Therefore, comprehensive distance learning has not served these kids. But our remediation is within comprehensive distance learning, and I understand the additional support. But if this is truly a problem that we've identified since the spring, I hesitate to think that it's working, you know? Like, it does limited in-person instruction give us a fighting chance of getting these kids to graduation where they belong?
It's a reasonable conclusion. I can tell you from the summer, we had very good success of gathering that credit from last spring, which was even more of a challenge. Summer, we had success, we're using that same structure now during the middle of the year to get to those kids more quickly. We anticipate using that same structure with additional resources that we've added in and what we learned from the summer and last spring. I believe we could say that we're gonna have more success. But your conclusion is reasonable. We've been challenged. CDL is a challenge for some students. We're just doing everything that we can to make sure that we're continuing to improve on that challenge.
I think I'll summarize my thoughts and I'll be quiet, but, it's for that reason that I am not in favor of this amendment. It's for that reason that I would like to give that decision-making over limited in-person instruction to the administrative team, to give us as much of a fighting chance as we have to serve the students who have been most underserved by comprehensive distance learning. So that's where I'm gonna be on this position, not because I think it's a really well-crafted and well-thought amendment. That's just where I think it falls short for me. So,
So where does it fall short?
because I feel like the kids that we have to leverage support to, realistically, we're not getting back into limited in-person until wave 4 is vaccinated twice. Because that's where our secondary instructors, by Oregon Health Authority mandates are, or maybe not mandates, but.
Recommendations.
Yeah, and so that's my hesitation. I entered this conversation saying that the month matters because of those students. And I think it'd be really inconsistent for me to then see this, know that we're still losing that month, and be all gung-ho about it.
So can we
I would just like, sorry, I can't hear. I just said, I would just like to add that conversation and I don't think it's either or, Blake. I think it's both and. I think we can prioritize the health of our staff and our teacher and limit risk of possibility of mortality. And we can support those students to make sure that they are able to graduate. I asked a lot of questions, what supports are in place, what grief supports are in place, how do we work with our students? And it seems like we do have a comprehensive plan to help those students as much as we can.
I think I understand where you're going with that, Blake, but I also come back to, for me in particular, that when we start talking about high school students, the students that are not being successful in their current path, to expose them to potential COVID infection is worse to me than waiting another couple of weeks to make sure that staff has their available vaccinations, because the high school students are considered at that point biologically adults who can get the disease, who can get it, who can be sick.
And they can also get vaccinated.
Who can, right, they can also get vaccinated at 16 or 18, depending on the deal. But it's more that if we're talking about safety for the kids, then to me, it doesn't make any sense to bring them back to get a credit and expose them to a potential, something that we could say for 2 weeks, we can wait.
I understand where you're coming. I don't think it's 2 weeks. I think that's a misnomer.
Okay.
Because I think that's the most optimistic scenario is already putting us 4 weeks back.
Mm-hmm.
That's the most optimistic. So if a supply chain is broken, we're not hitting that timeline, and we're looking well past spring break. That's what I think. And I hear you, Robin, on the both ends. And I should clarify that I'm entering this conversation believing that we can be both safe and have kids back in school, whether we have a vaccine or not. And that's my position that comes from the last week spent talking to healthcare providers, spent talking to out-of-state boards that are providing in-person instruction, talking to administrators of schools that are safely operating schools open within our own region with the same COVID rates. And they're doing it successfully and safely. I believe with absolute confidence that we can implement a safety plan that can allow us to both have kids in school and have a safe environment for our staff and families.
Especially after being welcome to it, if they're asking.
Well, as a reminder, these standards that we've either going to adopt as actual or not. Those were designed prior to the vaccine. And so, the safety is paramount for students and staff, and that has been shown to be, what we've seen today in this classroom and how it's set up.
Okay. Is there discussion, further discussion on the amendment? Okay. So the motion is that limited in-person instruction, and this is an amendment, limited in-person instruction can phase in after the second dose of vaccine has been made available to relevant staff to support limited in-person instruction. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That's as it is. That was the motion.
Okay, I have, Director Roskovich, Director Stowers, and Director Howitt in favor of the amended motion. All those opposed?
Nay.
Nay. And I'm gonna,
I'm for it.
what, for?
Yeah,
You're for the amendment?
yes.
Okay, so Director Paluso is for the amendment. So we have 4 votes for, 2 against the amendment. Director Gomez, do you want to record a vote?
I'm still thinking, I'm trying to figure out if, I just want kids to come back safely. That's what I want. I want kids to come back safely.
So as it stands, whether Myra votes or not, there
Right.
are 4 for it, and 2 against, so it would pass, the amendment would pass.
Yeah, the amendment passes. Director Gomez, just, if you want to.
So are you gonna make another amendment, or is that?
No, I just
If it's
wanted to
not-
know if you want to vote on this amendment.
Yeah,
You're in favor of it?
yeah.
Okay, so it passes 5-2.
And that's what was average.
Well, so the original
The original
was
is now
to begin
back.
phasing, so that becomes the original,
Okay.
and that motion
Okay.
passes.
Okay.
Okay? But there's some crazy shenanigans where we amend it again. The board has approved to approve that limited in-person instruction.
Technically, you have to, you voted on the amendment to change the wording, so now technically you have to.
Vote on the
Okay,
original.
I was told last week that that's not how we have
You amended the wording, so now
Okay,
that's the wording.
so now
you voted on.
now there's a motion on the table, that limited in-person instruction can phase in after second dose of vaccine has been made available to relevant staff supporting limited in-person instruction. Any discussion about new amendment?
It's not an amendment, that's the motion now.
The motion
Now the
was
motion.
originally.
Yeah, wrong word, motion, not amendment. Okay. All those in favor?
Right.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so it passes unanimously that limited in-person instruction can phase in after the second dose of vaccine has been made available to relevant staff supporting limited in-person instruction. I would encourage staff, as you review this over the next week, because we have a business meeting and a work session, that if there's any clarification you require from the board about what we mean, bring it to the table then, and we'll provide the clarification. It's next week. We're seeing a lot of each other. Okay, there are other questions following health that have been asked to whether we should follow the health and safety metrics as mandatory or advisory. To be clear, no actions the board has taken today has required that we make a decision on this. We can make this decision, or we can make it later. I would be inclined to have this discussion later, but the board wants to have it now.
So if we don't, then are we under the continuing, what?
Well, that's a good question, because I have heard you reference advisory metrics, so I guess the board could stake a position that we want to make them mandatory,
We have been following them as they are mandatory.
which is how the district leadership team has been operating.
So there'd be no change in their operations if we don't take.
There would be no change in their operations, and also no obligation that they would have to treat them as mandatory. Is that accurate? It does not take board action to treat them as advisory, or is that?
Well, it's really us implementing, so we are following them as a mandatory because of some other things that are going on. We would do it anyway because it's the best interest of our students and our staff. But the flexibility is to not follow them and do what you want to do. But we are following the metrics.
Okay. Or is that a discussion we want to have? I'm inclined to push it to a future agenda item when it's necessary.
I have a comment on just it. You know, I don't mind making it mandatory and having the board take on that responsibility for that decision. So that's just a comment. We can have the conversation at a later time, but really, you know, it's like if we're already operating in a time where the staff has already been treating it as mandatory, they've been operating as mandatory, and then the community looks, you know, to staff or to us to make that decision, I would be fine with that.
Okay. What I'd ask is, in conversation, if ever the need comes up, that we need to clarify that. It'll come before the board. Thank you. Thanks, Robin. The last question that is not here but was on the introductory is about community facility use. It is, I guess, kind of a similar question. If the board took no action or did not specify, how is the district leadership team going to proceed related to facility use?
Facility outdoor use of fields at the elementary and middle school would not necessarily have an impact on us unless there was a field activity going on at that school in that timeframe. High schools, I would hesitate because our students are right now outdoors participating in athletics and conditioning. And I'd rather reserve those for that space and time. Again, we do not have middle school sports or elementary activities. Those fields are available, and I would not be opposed to the community having access to those. The only issue would be that we would not be able to open our building for access to restrooms. So it would be outdoors only, and they still would have to go through the request to access it through the proper channel.
So have we had requests, or is this just?
I think we just need to clarify, because they've been closed. They've been closed to the public, except for our, you know, our high schools, to have access to them.
I have not received, I've asked the facilities team to let me know if they get requests. I haven't heard of any requests yet. However, I have heard, not from the facilities team, that there are people in the community who would like to use them, but are under the impression that they're not allowed to. Correct.
And so does this include, I'm not quite sure what this includes, so does this include, are our playgrounds still closed? Does this include are they asking to use inside facilities as well as outside, like the gym and the pool?
I'll give you for instance, Chris, so you
Okay.
understand a couple. One, the playgrounds have been open since October. There has been some confusion in a couple buildings that was pointed out this week, but the playgrounds have been open since October. The confusion at one of the buildings this week is they kept their swings tied up, and that caused some controversy, so we got that fixed. We have not put up basketball hoops outside because it's just an opening for a gathering. That has caused some controversy as well, but it's consistent with what we're doing with athletics. Two organizations that I've talked to, one was a football private organization building youth football up. Had a great conversation with the manager of all of that, and he understood it. The second conversation, and this is a little different, is that we have some clinics that serve underserved populations that want to get vaccines out to them. That we are working with them directly right now, in conjunction, well, behind the scenes on all of this. We've been working with them since the winter break to use Gresham High School's parking lot and that facility to get vaccinations and other health care to those populations. So that's the kind of thing that we are supporting, because it's a health and safety piece, it's a community outreach piece. But those are the two conversations that I've had. Sorry to interrupt, Jordan, with some organizations.
So I think the reason this is one of the requests, so we wanted to clarify what we are allowing, if you will, which to the point made earlier, we haven't allowed this yet because no staff, but we're kind of, not kind of, we're following what we're doing in our schools with our community use facilities, which means right now, the guidance from the Oregon Health Authority says that we can't have indoor activities with our students. So if somebody requested the gym, I would say no to that right now. If somebody requests a field and they also want access to the restrooms because they want to do a 5-hour program, I would say no to that. If the board wants to direct us to allow indoor access to our facilities to the community, that is an action that staff would need the board to take in order to change what we're doing.
That also would have an impact on the staff team.
That's exactly right. The issue with the bathrooms is just getting them clean because of our enhanced safety protocols and the way our facilities team is supporting building readiness. And then once we start introducing students back to the campus, the enhanced cleaning that's going to be required for that, we just don't have staff to dedicate to cleaning restroom facilities for the community, for community use of the facility.
My understanding is indoor sports activities are not currently permitted by the Oregon Health Authority in the state, but outdoor activities are.
We are.
Certain ones.
If you look at the OSA things that have come out, had our meeting this week with athletic directors, I have weekly meetings. Currently, both Clackamas County and Multnomah County are more in the, can't remember the color, but we're in a phase where the only real sporting competition that we could have is soccer. We can also have cross-country, and those are in season 2, but even cross-country right now, finding parks that are open to run those races and volunteer staffing to run those races is gonna be a challenge. We talked about that. So cross-country is iffy because of outside things. Football could start, if we were, actually, football can start and they can practice, they just can't do full contact yet until we get 2 levels down from where we are, more safe. So I don't have high hopes that we'll have football, but I do have, some hope that we could have soccer and cross-country in our facilities. The number of spectators will be limited, no?
Volleyball.
Say again?
Volleyball.
Volleyball's indoor, and if we open up indoor and we get 1 level down now, we could do volleyball as long as the players are wearing their masks indoors, and we would have a significant restriction of spectators coming into the building.
There are some districts that are like.
Yes, now, if we can find out their facility, I haven't controlled that. I don't have one right now, but we could. Indoor, it's a challenge.
Would a decision today, it doesn't sound like a decision today would benefit anybody necessarily, but, I mean, I'm hearing outdoor facilities, if community organizations have requests for them, then they should make them to the district office. They are accessible and available to our community.
And the process is facilities, no one wants to go there, we can directly to facilities.
Yeah, and then indoor facilities is a conversation for the board to have soon. But I think it needs to come in the context of maybe a more summarized or presented what is OSAA authorizing and what is our community, what's available to our community from an activity standpoint so that we can understand what facility needs we might have.
Much like the guidelines for the health, OSAA has given that to the county. I cannot deny that, or confirm that I sit on that board. I'm only one vote.
And that one looks like, I mean, in general, that it would fall under policy that we have anyhow. And so the board doesn't necessarily approve facilities use during regular times. So it feels like that's their decision to do, so under policy.
You feel supported enough to make the decision? Okay. All right. That concludes this information item. I appreciate everybody's time and engagement. I don't think I only speak for myself, but we've received hundreds of communications. And it's been a weighty consideration, and we're not through it just yet, how we get kids back. So, thank you, everybody. If you were only listening for that, you're welcome to log off of the meeting. If you want to stick around we have one more agenda item, besides routine business.
I'd like to thank the staff. It was actually a very good presentation tonight, and I think it was the most cohesive I've seen of all what we've done, so thank you.
Okay, we have an action item, response to elected official statements as a carryover from last week. At the January 21st, 2021 board work session, the board discussed a possible response to personal comments made by Clackamas County Commissioner Mark Scholl. Time has been set aside on the agenda for the board to review and approve a statement. In the supplementary materials, there is a statement provided, and I would ask, Director Ruskovich, would you consider reading this document?
Oh, yeah, sure. Did you want me to turn my thing on, like speak to the camera?
Well, you,
Oh, okay, well, alrighty, sorry. The Gresham-Barlow School District, or School Board, excuse me, is committed to meeting the needs of each student and celebrate the diversity of our families, our staff, and the cultural assets each person brings to our district. As education leaders, we strive to create a future with culturally responsive graduates who will thrive in an ever-changing global community. To ensure that we can create this world, we will do our part to call out bigotry and harm to children and families in our district. We are committed to confronting white supremacy, nationalism, and racial violence, be it emotional, mental, or physical, at every level within our district. On January 11th, 2021, it was made public that Clackamas County Commissioner Mark Scholl had made contemptible comments on social media that were harmful for Muslims, immigrants, BIPOC, LGBTQIA+, and other marginalized communities. As a school board serving a school district that encompasses parts of Clackamas County, we stand with Clackamas County leaders in condemning Mark Scholl and his hateful and inflammatory rhetoric. County commissioners represent and oversee institutions such as public health, corrections, property registration, and public works. In order to represent and serve constituents in this work, a robust equity lens is required. While we acknowledge Mark Scholl has publicly apologized for his comments, an apology is not enough. As leaders in education representing these same constituents, we join with Clackamas County leaders in calling on Mark Scholl to resign as county commissioner immediately.
So, there's a recommended action of approving the board statement as presented. This statement was, thank you, Amanda, for drafting it, and then it was provided to the board to solicit individual feedback, and I guess before we have an opportunity to discuss this or have any questions, and then it would require a motion to accept. Are there any comments?
Thank you for taking the time to do this, Amanda. I think it's really important that our district really clarifies our values to the community, especially when we have other elected leaders saying things that might cause damage. So thank you so much for taking this time.
Without any other comments, at January 21st meeting, it was presented as a possibility that we could support Clackamas County leaders' statement that they had provided. And then there was an alternative path where we would basically write our own statement that in its course supports the statement Clackamas County leaders made. So one was signing right on to the Clackamas County leaders statement that is in the January 21st agenda, and this is the alternative course. I'll speak personally, I'm still in favor of the January 21st option of just signing on to the Clackamas County leaders statement. But That's my own position.
Since that time as well, on January 22nd, the school board members of Color Caucus under the Oregon School Boards Association also issued a statement. And some of the comments that are in our proposed statement match what they have, in particular talking about school board members and the role that we play in supporting our students and family. And I think it's important to identify that we're speaking out because our district does cover Clackamas County and Multnomah County both.
Other thoughts, other discussion?
If there's some more clarifying motion.
So I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve the board statement as presented.
I second.
Okay, been moved by Amanda, seconded by Robin, to approve the board statement as presented. Any discussion? Because my vote will likely be no, I'd like to just clarify why. I too am in agreement that Commissioner Mark Scholl should resign for his comments. So that's not what is up for debate. I take issue with a couple of the phrases that we employ, particularly condemning the person as well as their actions, which I just, from a personal value standpoint, I take issue with. I also think that the apology statement, wherein we effectively acknowledge his public apology and then stipulate that an apology is not enough. I think there's more constructive words that we could choose and propose some, but this is the board statement and not mine. So I'll vote no on those grounds, not because I don't think that he should resign, fully in favor of that call, but just simply not in favor of the statement. Okay, so I'm hearing no other discussion. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Aye. Nay? Okay, so 6-1. This is the statement of the board. Thanks again, Amanda, for crafting it and putting in the work. Okay. I'm going to move to announcements. February 4th, we will have a board work session. At this time, that is planned to be virtual, as with all of our regular board meetings, because while this virtual environment / I guess our own hybrid environment of in-person can work for a work session, it's very, very, very difficult to engage in public comments. So I'd remind folks that the best way to get your comments in front of the board for a board meeting is to email them to Avery4, that's Sarah Avery. Her email address is Avery4, AVERY4, the number, at gresham.k12.or.us. If you get those comments to her and let her know that you'd like them to be part of the public record, that'll be included in the agenda content. Additionally, when you send that, and Sarah may ask for that clarification, please let her know if you would be willing to come on and say your statement as well, as enter it as a written form. That's not to say that we can or will be able to hear from everybody who is willing to make a statement. But that does give us a pool to select from to try to reflect the general sentiments of the statements. So again, email Avery4@gresham.k12.or.us by
5 p.m. the day of the meeting.
by 5 p.m. the day of the meeting, which is February 4th. Okay, so February 4th board work session at 6 p.m. followed by a regular board meeting at 7 p.m. There being no other business before the board, we're adjourned.
Nice job, everybody.
Yep.